Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Schargorodski, and I am with the Kentucky Mesonet and Kentucky Climate Center. And I would like to welcome you to the Kentucky Monthly Climate Perspective on Drought and Hydrologic Conditions. This will be looking over the conditions for August and the first few days of September. We have a guest presenter today. His name is Chip Zimmer with the Kentucky Division of Water. And I'll go over this next slide. There we go. The production of this webinar is a reflection of the contributions of many partners. Not to leave anyone out, we have the National Integrated Drought Information System, as well as the Midwest Drought Early Warning System, the Kentucky Division of Water, and the USGS. The next scheduled webinar is next month, October 3rd. It's a Thursday, as we try to keep all of them as the first Thursday of the month. And it'll be at the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. We are recording this webinar for future viewing. So if you know someone who was not able to be on the webinar, we will be passing out the link later. So with no further ado, I am going to pass control over to Chip Zimmer, and he will lead the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Megan. Like Megan said, my name is Chip Zimmer. I'm with the Kentucky Division of Water, and I'm going to be hosting this webinar with the help of Matt Dixon, who will be coming on in a bit to talk about agriculture impacts. And let's see if we can get the next slide to come up. There we go. So just a quick outline of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to go over the recent conditions, and then we'll have Matt come on and talk about the agriculture impacts, and then I'll finish up with the outlooks for the next month and season, and then we'll go over a summary and answer any questions. And as you can see on the pictures here, the picture from Fulton County looks like that was from yesterday, and they are already harvesting some crops out there. And you can see from earlier last month, a field in Shelby County. It looks like some nice green pastures for the cattle there. So start off here. This is the 30-day estimated precipitation. It's the background colors are radar estimated precipitation, and then we have the actual precipitation recorded by the Mesonet gauges. And see, they're pretty well coordinated. There's a little difference. It's a point observation compared to a radar observation that's looking at a 2 square mile area. So there's going to be a little bit of variation. And you can see over the past 30 days, the northeastern part of the state has been extremely wet, and it's been a little wetter along the Tennessee border, especially from about Clinton, Cumberland counties west. And you do see that southeastern Kentucky, and the parts of central Kentucky have been a little drier, only 1 inch, 2 inches of rain over the past 30 days. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a bit. Go out to 60 days. Again, northeastern Kentucky and southern Kentucky have been wetter than the rest of the state. It's kind of been a case of the haves and the have-nots. Places in northeastern Kentucky have got close to a foot of rain in the past 60 days. That's a lot. On the flip side, you can see over, I guess we'll call it north central, northwestern Kentucky. I don't know, out there by just south and west of Louisville, around Fort Knox. A little drier than the rest of the state. Only 3, 4, 5 inches of rain over the past 60 days. And you can see southeastern Kentucky, not quite as dry, but definitely a lot drier than the places that have really picked up a ton of rain. And when you go out to the 90-day, you can really, everybody has gotten a lot of rain. This is when we get into that really wet part of the year. It's kind of been a the first half of the year was extremely wet for Kentucky, and we've really dried out, at least in places. We've really dried out. Again, especially northeastern Kentucky, it just still wet. But when we get into the 90-day here, we're starting to pick up in some of that wetness. So you can see everybody's been pretty wet. Looks like that's Rowan County up there's 22 inches of rain in 3 months. It's pretty amazing. But everybody's at least got 12 inches or more of rain during the past 90 days. Now this is the SPI, which is the Standard Precipitation Index, and it's really comparing rainfall rates or rainfall data and comparing it to historic rainfall. So right now this is the 90-day SPI, and what you're seeing is that it's been really wet now over the past 90 days, and it has been to the 90 days, this basically from September 3rd and 90 days back for past years. So compared to historical amount records, it's been pretty wet. See southern Kentucky, northeast Kentucky, it's exceptional wetness. So it's over 2 standard deviations. Once we get to 60 days, though, you see dryness appearing over north central Kentucky and also, or west central Kentucky, or whatever we're going to call that, and southeastern Kentucky. And you can see not anything extreme, but some abnormal to moderate dryness, maybe even a few pockets of severe dryness. And again, you saw that on the precipitation map, that those are the areas that were a little lower, and you can see that dryness appearing on the SPI. When we look at the 30-day SPI, you can see eastern Kentucky, again, moderate to a few pockets of severe dryness, but you really lose that dryness in over by the Louisville area, and that's a reflection you saw on the 30-day. It was a little wetter over there from that rain we had week and a half ago, and they didn't quite get that much rain out of that system in southeastern Kentucky as other parts of the state. So that's why that 30-day signal is really starting to show up a lot drier out there. Now, this is a new graph that we have that Stu produced that's going to be part of the new dashboard that he's creating. And what this is showing is rain, accumulated precipitation for 6 different mesonet stations since July 1st. And this is an area, the north central Kentucky area. It's out by Louisville, Fort Knox. And you can see, looking at this, the first 3 weeks of this, which is the first 3 weeks of July, you can see there was a lot of the precipitation for this time fell in that area, 3-4 inches of rain. And then after we get past that 3rd week in July, you can see those lines pretty much stay straight. There's not a lot of rainfall, and that's looking at that 60-day SPI. You can see where that was picking up that dryness. And then that last event we had back at the end of August, you can see again they got another good amount of rain out there, and that shows, and that's why that 30-day wasn't as wet out there, or wasn't as dry out there, as it was that rainfall right there kind of helped out a little bit. Actually, probably helped out a lot, but as they were in moderate drought at that point in time. And we got the same plot for southeastern Kentucky, and kind of the same story, except that the wetness really extended till the end of July out there, and it was a lot more. If you noticed on that previous graph, the max precipitation was around 4 inches of rain. Well, when you hit the end of July, for these gauges, you're already at 4 inches of rain. But then as you go through August, just no rain whatsoever. And really at the end of August, you see there was some precipitation from that event, but not nearly as much as the north central area. And you also, from this one, you see there the Owsley County gauge was a lot lower than the rest of them. The other graph, they're all pretty close together. This one, Owsley County, it really hasn't gotten as much rainfall, especially from that last system, than the other 5 gauges. So they're kind of the outlier there. All right, and this is the temperature departures from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. And the one on the left is the average maximum temperatures for the past roughly past 30 days. And you can see it's been a little above normal, especially in the central part of the state. And the rest of the state's been around normal, so nothing too out of the ordinary. But, it has definitely been a fairly warm August. And the same thing on the right side, you can see it's the average minimum temperature, and roughly the same thing, a little more of the warm temperatures than the high temperature map. But again, kind of between just a little above average to normal. This, looking at the modeled soil moisture, and on the left is from the CPC, and you can see, again, for the soil moisture, pretty good shape for the state. Extreme Western Kentucky has a really more soil moisture than the rest of the state, but everybody is above average. And the GRACE shallow groundwater drought indicator shows about the same thing. It's showing eastern central Kentucky about average. I bet if we'd looked at this a couple weeks ago, it would have painted a little bit different story. We did have some soils drying out, and that rainfall last week, 2 weeks ago, really helped out a lot. And this right here is the evaporative demand drought index. And what this is showing is how much moisture is being pulled out of the soil through just evaporation and through plants pulling water out of the soil, et cetera. And what you can see, basically the 1 month map and the 2 month map are showing pretty much the exact same thing, and that is central and eastern Kentucky there's a little bit more demand for water than really the western part of the state, and really the whole Ohio Valley. That's helping. That was helping drive, and is helping drive the kind of dry conditions, because what water we're getting is being pulled out quicker than normal. This is a 3 month soil moisture graph from 4 of the mesonet stations. The first one is the Henderson County gauge, and they've been in the wetter part of the area in western Kentucky, and that really shows up in the soil moisture. You can see every so often you're getting those replenishing rains, and the soil moisture is never dropping down that far. It's always staying above 25%. This is what you want to see for soil moisture. This is optimal soil moisture for crops. I would expect the crops out there are doing very well. But then you go over to Breckinridge County, which really isn't that far from Henderson County, and you can see where it has been dry. The soil moisture since right at the end of June and the beginning of July started slowly dropping off, and as we got in August, you can see it got down pretty far. And you can see that last rainfall there at the end of August over on the right side of the graph, and you can see the soils did respond a little bit, but they've actually dropped back down. And actually, if you look at the 2-inch soil moisture level, it's actually lower than it was before that rain. And that's really, at this point, it's approaching or at wilting point, and probably pretty much the same for the 4 and 8-inch soil moisture levels as well. They're getting pretty close to wilting point. So luckily, we're pretty much at the end of the growing season for most crops. But for pastures, they're still needing moisture. So having soil moisture levels that low is not good for them. If you go down to Breathitt County, that's out in eastern Kentucky, and same thing as Breckinridge County. You can see where that dryness kicked in, and like that graph that we showed earlier. Excuse me, I hit the wrong button. You can see dryness started a little bit later in the year, but it's definitely showing up. And again, you can see where that rainfall kicked in, and it has since dried back out, and again is just about to the same levels as it was before that rain. And again, especially at 2-inch level is pretty much at wilting point. Luckily, the 4 and 8 inches aren't quite that low yet, but they are dropping. And the last we were looking at LaRue County, and same as Breckenridge, you can see it dropped off just about the same time. The only difference is you can see they got a little bit more rain from that last event. And so as a result, the soil moisture levels, while they have dropped, they are still a lot higher than they were a couple weeks ago. So but they are still on the way down. So if we have continued dryness, they're going to be back down at the same place. But for the time being, at least there is some moisture there. Looking at the 7-day average stream flows, looking good. The only gauge below normal is, I believe that's Lincamp Creek down there at Corbin, but everybody else is either normal or we even have a few above normal, especially in northeastern Kentucky where it has been so wet. And if we can get it up, next is the 28-day average. And maybe I'll get to show it to you. There it is. All right, we have the 28-day average. And what it is showing, it's picking up on some of that dryness we had before that last event. That last event has really brought stream levels back up. But you can see the 28 average still includes some of that dry period, or a good chunk of that dry period. And so you can still see some stream flows. The average stream flows for the 28-day period are still below normal, but nothing reaching that much below normal, less than 10% range, and still a lot of them in the normal category, and a couple in the much above normal. All right, looking at the flipping, going from dryness to wetness, looking at the current flooding, we do not have any. Everything is green, which is good, and kind of what you would expect this time of year, since it is one of the drier times of the year. Moving on to the U.S. Drought Monitor, you can see in our region we do have some small areas of abnormally dry conditions in the Ohio River Valley. If you go up towards Illinois, Iowa, there is some moderate drought. The same thing down in the Carolinas, though I expect Dorian's going to wipe that out today and tomorrow. But all in all, just a little dry, but nothing significant. You have to go down to Texas, Oklahoma to get into some more of the extreme, exceptional drought. But all in all, for the country as a whole, it's looking pretty good, especially for September. Usually you see a lot more color in this map nationally than we have this year. It's been a pretty wet year for the nation as a whole. And if we look at the 1 month change, you can see in the Louisville area there has been no change, and then we've had the 1 class degradation over in southeastern Kentucky. Now this is looking at from August 6th to September 3rd. If you trim this down a couple of weeks, you would see that there was improvement in the Louisville area because that was at moderate drought, and last week it was upgraded to just abnormally dry since thanks to that rain we had. So, but it doesn't get picked up since we're looking at a 1 month scale. And then looking just at Kentucky, you can see about a quarter of the state, a little over a quarter of the state is in D0 right now. And it's kind of highlighting those areas that we were talking about earlier that we saw in the SBI where the dryness was, and over in the Louisville area, Fort Knox area, and then over across to southeastern Kentucky. Again, it's just abnormally dry. We did have some moderate drought, but that was erased. So if we stay dry, I would expect some moderate drought to be returning in the next couple weeks if we don't see any rain. So local storm reports. A lot of these came from August 6th and 7th, and also the 20th, mainly from damage from winds knocking down trees and power lines. We did have some flash flooding, produced some impacts in Bath and Nicholas County on August 7th, and also in Bath and Harrison County near the end of the month, and that was associated with that last storm system that came through. And over the weekend, on August 31st, we had some quarter to golf ball size hail in Scott and Harrison County. And I live in Scott County, and we had, I think it was marble size hail at my house and shingles coming off my neighbor's roof. So it was an isolated storm, but very powerful, and dumped I think it was about 2 inches of rain in an hour. And now I'm going to turn it over to Matt Dixon so he can talk about the agricultural impacts.
Okay, so I think you guys can hear me now. Thanks, Chip. Just to start from what you mentioned earlier, some across the state have already started picking corn. This is not out of the norm, pretty normal for this time of year. To the right is a picture of corn harvest in progress on the eastern side of Scott County yesterday evening, a couple miles from my house. I think it should be pointed out, so harvest will pick up steam as the month progresses, and that will continue on into October. Same with beans, but I did see a report from Matt Adams in Hardin County recently that early planted corn should produce better yields than some of that later planted corn. Earlier will be average to above average yields, and late planted corn and beans turning the other direction with the previous month's dry conditions. I did talk to Andy Mills. He's an extension agent in Meade County. He had mentioned midway through August, whenever we were in the heart of that moderate drought here in Kentucky, that late planted corn was going to be hard-pressed to see 100 bushels an acre in his county, particularly the southern section of the county. Go along with that, we have to keep in mind that our data here at the Ag Weather Center, it does, I've said this in the past, it includes Mesonet data, it includes airport data, so on and so forth. But our data was showing through August 18th, the state had only averaged 0.992 inches. So very little and definitely very dry, especially for agriculture that needs that timely rainfall. Now, looking back at the past month, the dry weather and heat seem to take the most toll on pastures. As mentioned earlier, the focus area was north central Kentucky, but that expanded into southeastern Kentucky recently. Like Chip was saying, soil moisture has just tapered off. Despite rotational grazing, pasture quality reduced quite drastically and quickly. Fields essentially burned up in spots and turned brown. Many across the state started feeding supplemental hay, and even with the recent beneficial rainfall over the past 2 weeks, many are still feeding hay to let those pastures recover and green up a bit more. The warm temperatures to go along with that, it had more of a compounding factor on the dry conditions, just made it that much worse. I mean, highs this past month were consistently in the middle 80s to middle 90s. Usually you do get that with those periods of drought, dry conditions. We saw that back in 2012, definitely not to the extent this year, but those warmer temperatures do accompany those drought conditions. I noticed in the outlooks looking forward that more warm weather is on the way. Potentially back in the 90s next week. Definitely something we don't want to see, especially after these 2 days we're seeing now of fall-like conditions. Many producers I've been talking to are still looking for rain. It's simply, I mean, look at the forecast, doesn't look like it's going to happen this week. The dry weather and high temperatures, I mean, looking forward, could put us back to where we were, like Chip was saying, back to a moderate drought in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So hopefully we do see some of that rain and help out pastures for fall grazing. Speaking of pastures and whatnot, look at that table below. Pasture quality has dropped tremendously since last month's webinar. As you see in the table below right now, 18%, actually on the right side there, 18% is considered poor pasture quality, that is, 35% fair and 37% good. In early August, looking back, those numbers were 9% poor, 24% fair, and 57% good. So we added 9% to the poor category, and we lost 20% in the good category. So, I mean, just looking at that, we're simply going in the wrong direction right now. While it does seem like a bad situation, and it is not as bad as some previous years, but I talked with Dan Miller, who's with the Kentucky Cattlemen's Association recently, and he did mention that there is some good news associated with this dry weather, and he brought up a good point. The past two winters, especially going into January and February, it's just been absolutely wet outside. And that continued from the fall the previous year. So it was just wet conditions for an extended period of time. And what that did was really make for some muddy conditions in those pastures and really hurt cattle. And, you know, as dry as it is right now, maybe this will help us out going into winter with not as much mud initially in place. So he also mentioned to me that it's been a good year for hay, and he thinks producers should be okay as long as it doesn't turn overly dry. Lastly, looking at horticulture, John Strang, he's our hort specialist here at UK. He came out with his latest Fruit Facts newsletter recently. He visited some orchards this past month and whatnot. Some are drier than others. We've seen that spotty rainfall. And he mentioned that some young apple trees were looking water stressed in the drier areas and to go ahead and irrigate if no rain is seen shortly, which looks like will be the case. But that water helps out with fruit sizing and reduces that pre-harvest fruit drop here in late summer, early fall. So overall, that's what I got, and I'm going to send it back to you, Chip.
All right. Thank you, Matt. And while we don't have a slide for while we're talking about impacts, I wanted to briefly talk about water supply impacts, which the good news is that we do not have any right now. I have not heard of any systems that are having any type of low water issues, and we really do not expect any at this time. Like we saw in the previous slide, stream flows are in good shape. And water supply lakes, especially with all the rain that we had earlier in the year and even earlier into the summer, they all should be in pretty good shape for this time of year. So we really do not anticipate any problems at this time. Obviously, if this continues on into the extended future, that could change. But for the time being, we are in good shape at least for the drinking water side of everything. All right, now we are going to go look at the outlooks. If I can, there we go. And this is the quantitative precipitation forecast for the next 7 days. This is showing the amount of rainfall that's expected. And along the East Coast, you can see all the rain that they're expecting from Dorian. Also, looks like they're going to have some pretty good rains across the northern tier of the U.S. And also in the Four Corners area, they're going to get in on some monsoon rains, which is typical for this time of year. But for our part of the world, very little to no rain. You can see that light shaded green that's kind of scattered over part of the state is 0.01 to 0.1 inches of rain. So negligible amounts, if any at all. And if we go look at the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day precipitation outlooks, for the 6 to 10 day outlook, we are right on the edge of the below normal, and it's not a very strong signal. You can see that line is 33%. So the part of the state that is in the gray, they are in the normal area, which basically means that there's a 33% chance of below normal precipitation, a 33% chance of normal precipitation, and a 33% chance of above normal precipitation. When you get down into that orange shading, Like I said, it's not a very strong signal, so you're talking just a few points higher. So it might be, 35% chance of below normal precipitation, which would mean that there's a 30% chance of above normal precipitation. So it's not a strong signal. And when you get to the 8 to 14 day outlook, all of Kentucky is in that gray area. So not a strong signal. We could be dry, we could be wet, we could be somewhere in between. There's just not a strong signal saying what the weather is going to look like. The one thing that it does show, we don't have a map up here, but it is going to be warm. There is a pretty strong signal that we are going to be warm. Like Matt was talking about, as we move into next week, expect temperatures back into the 90s again, which if this does pan out and we are below, continue to stay dry, that's not a good combination. So we look ahead for the entire month of September. Again, Kentucky is in that equal chance, except for maybe down there along Pine Mountain. They're in the slightly warmer air, but again, that's not very much. So again, pretty much for Kentucky, for temperatures, they're predicting equal chance of whether it be warm or cold, and the same thing for precipitation. We're in the middle of that equal chance. So just not a strong signal whether it's going to be wet, dry, or somewhere in between. And if you look at the Atlantic seaboard, you can see where for September they're counting on above normal precipitation, and I would imagine most of that is just from Dorian. And as we look to the seasonal, which is September, October, November, the outlook is showing they're expecting everybody in the United States to be warm. Not a super strong signal for our part of the world, 40, 50%. So, but if you go out to the Four Corners, you're getting into a much higher. And then if you get up into northern Alaska, 70, 80% chance of it being above normal. So that's especially for a seasonal outlook, you don't see numbers that high very often. And looking at precipitation, really, again, we're in that equal chance. Could be dry, could be wet, could be normal. They really just don't have a strong signal. There's no El Nino, La Nina going on. So we're starting to get into that season in the fall, and so it's just going to have to see how it plays out, unfortunately. Looking at the monthly stream flow outlook from the Ohio River forecast, looking at normal conditions throughout Kentucky for September. And if we look at the flood forecast for September, October, and November, they have all of Kentucky in the less than 50% long-range flood risk, which again is not surprising. September, October, November are the lowest stream flows on average for the state, so that's pretty much expected to be below 50% for flooding for this time of year. This was just released at the beginning of the month, and this is looking at the potential for significant wildfire in the U.S., and you can see Kentucky is in the below normal category. This is going to be based upon all the rain that we had earlier in the year. And you look at that, and it's the same thing for October. One thing I'll point out, this is talking about significant fires. There's still definitely the chance for fires, especially once the leaves drop. Really all you need is a few days of sunny, dry, low humidity days, add some wind, and you'll get wildfires, just burning that leaf litter. But those aren't what they're looking at. Those are relatively small fires that are easy to contain and put out. What they're looking at are the bigger fires like we saw in 2016. Once the underbrush starts drying out and you start getting some larger fires. So that is what this is looking at. And now if we do continue to stay dry going forward, this could easily change. This is looking at October, and we didn't include November, December because, again, that's pretty far out. And again, if we do continue to stay dry, that easily could change. We saw that in 2016. It started out very wet that year, and we all remember what happened that fall with the fires, especially down in Tennessee. But we did have some pretty significant fires in Kentucky that year as well. So hopefully we do not follow that path again. So in summary, after a very wet start to the year, we have gotten dry for portions of the state, and that's being reflected in the drought monitor. Over the near term, we expect conditions to be hot and dry with only moderate humidity, which is just going to enable drying to occur at a faster pace. The impacts to agriculture are mixed. We're having negative effects on late planted crops and also pastures, but it is benefiting the harvest. Excuse me. And the monthly and seasonal outlooks really don't provide a strong signal regarding precipitation. So, but we are entering the driest portion of the year. So it is probably going to be dry regardless. It's just going to be a case of how dry. And there is an enhanced likelihood that we do have above normal temperatures for this time of the year. Excuse me. And then based on the current outlooks, the impacts the current dryness does not pose any significant threat to municipal water supplies. So that is all that I have, and we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Chip and Matt. And like Chip just said, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat box and we can discuss. All right, it looks like we don't have any questions. So we look forward to seeing you again, talking to you again on October 3rd at the same time. In the case that we do experience additional dryness, we do have the option of increasing frequency. So we will send it out to the listserv and make sure that you are aware of that. So if you have any other questions that you didn't have a chance to ask now, feel free to email or give us a call. And if not, I guess we will talk to you next month. Thank you, everyone.